Creators of lore, thank you for joining me for the 4th installment of the Outlaws of Thunder Junction storyline. This part of the story centers around Annie and her past. So yes, this is Annie Flashes, Annie's flashback. She's made a connection to someone, and it scares her. She's afraid to lose again. She's just come to Thunder Junction. So instead of accepting this new fellow that she's met by the name of Jodie, Annie's heart was pulled in multiple directions. Jodie just wanted company. He had already lost the love of his life. Annie, for her part, couldn't let anyone in. It was too dangerous after what had happened to her. So she called Jodie by the wrong name intentionally and left. Out in the darkness of Saddlebrush, she thought she saw a skittering shadow. She shook her head. She needed to stay sharp. The long walk back to her ranch caused her left leg to act up again. After stopping to talk with Fortune, and she did consider it a conversation because Fortune was a smart horse, she had no idea where he came from, but she understood his stomps and whickers. She saw a lit candle in one window. "He been up the whole time?" she asked. Fortune nodded. "Rest up, boy. Gonna need you at your best." Fortune headed towards the barn with an insulted air about him. Annie headed to the lit room. Her nephew Tommy lived there. Tommy was staring out the window. He didn't acknowledge her existence when she entered. Tommy had become paler and started to lose his hair. He was covered in sweat and shaking, but the groaning was the hardest for Annie to bear. His pain was palpable, and when she asked about it, he winced at her voice and nodded. Annie grabbed a bottle of blue swirling smoke, a potent painkiller. The bottle was mostly gone. About a week's worth was left. She was supposed to have more already, but the apothecary's shipment was late. She unstoppered the bottle, and Tommy inhaled deeply. His eyes closed, but Annie could feel his disgust with her. After a sleepless night, Annie started her day. At least Tommy was sleeping. He looked peaceful. The farmhouse was still new to Annie. Her room was sparse, and she barely spent any time in it, usually just long enough to braid her hair. Stepping outside, she found a basket on her porch. It was full of bread and different foods, perfect for a picnic. Maybe Jodie had left it here. Annie cursed herself for getting careless. She wasn't even aware anyone had come by her ranch. She headed into town and luckily was able to get 2 more bottles of blue smoke. She allowed herself a smile in the morning sun. A voice said, "I didn't know you could do that." Turning around, it turned out the teasing voice was Jodie's. She said back, "This smile ain't from you, Jodie." He came back with, "You were plenty happy last night in my bed, Annie." "You're going too far now, Jodie. I don't like finding surprises like that basket." Jodie's face was pure confusion. It hadn't been him. "If you think I'm giving up my sleep to bake you bread, you've lost your mind. People around here talk, Annie. They're worried about you. It's just someone being neighborly." Annie tamped down the emotions that rose up in her. Getting attached just led to problems. The conversation was interrupted by a chorus of screams. Annie charged towards the sound, fighting against a surge of townfolk running towards her. No, they were running away from something gigantic. Jodie grabbed her and pulled her into the general store, along with many other fleeing townfolk. She broke Jodie's grip and forced her way through the terrified people. Looking outside, she saw a massive rattle worm. She tensed up, ready to try and stop that heavily plated creature. But the worm was just a dumb beast, and with nothing for it to eat in view, it just traveled directly through Saddlebrush and back out into the desert. Was that thing the cause of the shadow she had seen last night? She was losing her edge. Annie quickly made her way to the stables and heaved a sigh of relief. Fortune was okay, but it was obvious the worm's arrival had worked him up. A scream from outside drew her attention. It turned out to be a 9-year-old girl. She was traumatized by the worm's appearance. Annie gave her a bit of the blue smoke to calm her down, and then she asked the people surrounding her why no one had ever done anything about that worm. An onlooker points out the obvious. That thing is way too big. What would you even do about it? Annie resolved at that moment to stop the worm. When she said as much, the girl's brother offered to help. He was a lad of 18 years by the name of Bo. More people volunteered to help as well, but Annie didn't want to put their lives in danger. But she respected their wishes instead and barked out, "We leave at dawn." She couldn't look at the smiles this caused. That night, as she packed her things, she cursed herself. Why borrow trouble? She knew deep down why. The little girl Mira had reminded her of Tommy. Tommy, who had been poisoned by a snake because Annie got careless. In some small way, stopping this worm might help put her guilt to bed. She thought of Akul and how getting tangled up with him is how Tommy got sick in the first place. Her mind was pulled back to the present by Tommy's pained groaning from the other room. She hastened over to him and grabbed a bottle of the blue smoke, but Tommy refused to accept it. "I'm tired of being tired." A side effect of the blue smoke was fatigue, so Annie didn't try to force it. Tommy had been stuck in that bed since he got here. If he wanted to stop the smoke, she would not gainsay him. "I'll be gone tomorrow, Tommy. I have to stop a rattle worm." She continued talking, but Tommy never responded. She left saying she'd be back tomorrow night. In the morning, she found Bo and the townsfolk waiting for her. Jodie had come by as well to see her off. Unexpectedly, Tommy appeared at the front door, leaning heavily on a walking stick. He pointed at Bo. "Bring back my aunt or don't come back." His intensity caused Bo to stutter. Yes, no, I will. I'll lie down and die if I don't." Tommy nodded. Good. This was the first sign of affection from Tommy she had seen in a long time. She wanted to cry and hated that everyone was here to see her in that moment. Bo's nerves caused him to jabber endlessly once they were on their way, and Annie liked him, but he was not meant to hunt worms out in the desert. Bo and Mira were orphans. They had been for half a decade or more. The residents of Saddlebrush had stepped up to help care for the kids. It made Annie think of where she came from. They operated the same way there. Everyone cared for everyone, as it should be. The past was long gone, however. She had already lost her people. She was afraid to accept a new one. What if she lost them again? Hope was to be avoided. Annie used her magically enhanced sight to spot the worm tunneling out into the desert. She had located its lair. A moment later, a tiny baby worm popped its little head out of the hole. Annie's heart caught in her throat. She had been using this worm as a proxy for Akul. Defeating it would expunge some of her sin against Tommy. But now, well, plans change. The townsfolk were relieved they weren't going to have to fight. Annie drove the worms deeper into the desert where more prey could easily be found. No more raids on the town. The journey back to Saddlebrush was all smiles. Tommy was waiting for her. He was clean, looking better than he had in a long time. There was a bag at his feet. "I waited for you, Annie, so I could say goodbye. I'm going back to our homeland. I need real medicine." Annie's face was grim. "Thanks for waiting, Tommy. I know you hate me for what happened to you." "Hasaya, no." Annie looked up, startled. She wasn't used to hearing her real name being used here. "I love you, but I can't be here." Annie could see that though Tommy was still very much in pain, he was stronger than she had seen him in a long time. So he departed, and Annie was left with her thoughts. These townsfolk could be her new people, but ultimately, she would always be alone. And that ends the Annie flashback and the 4th installment of the Outlaws of Thunder Junction story. I hope you enjoyed it, my friends. Come on back tomorrow for the next installment. Big shout out to the channel's members and patrons. Thank you very much for supporting what we do here. And if you enjoy these videos, then become a patron. Join the membership. It's a fantastic thing to do. Go watch some more fun stories on this channel because at the end of the day, my friends, lore is life.